Hi, it's Alex. I want to take a look at John 6:26 to 27 today with a focus on the negative-positive relationship. Sometimes the negative-positive relationship can be mistaken for the alternative, but it's important to remember that alternative is a coordinate relationship while negative-positive is a subordinate relationship. So even though there's a contrast relationship in negative-positive like alternative, the negation in the negative positive really reinforces and strengthens the positive statement or the positive exhortation. So let me show you this in John 6:26 through 27. Let me read this. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not," and this is one of the key words we want to be looking for, "not because you saw the signs, but," and this is the other main one, this construction of not, but. "Not because you saw the signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes," he says, "but for the food that endures to eternal life, which," and this is another potential proposition here, "which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal." Let me show you how I broke this down into its various propositions so that I could arc them. This is how I broke them down. I kept this, what I see as an introductory formula, "Truly, truly, I say to you." I kept that, but I abbreviated it because I wanted to keep that with this first proposition. And then secondly, I made another choice that you'll see here, that technically I suppose you could break up "you are seeking me" as its own proposition, and except for this construction that we saw, you could see "because you saw the signs" could stand on its own. Without this construction, it might be a ground statement with "because" as a key word here. But because what Jesus is saying in this opening statement, because of this "not but" negative positive construction, he's saying "you are seeking me not because you saw the signs," or "you are not seeking me because you saw the signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves." That's what Jesus is really saying here. So then the third proposition, "do not work for the food that perishes, but," we see the same construction, "for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you." This seems like an explanatory note to me about the food that endures to eternal life, that the Son of Man will give this to them. And then the last proposition, "for on him God the Father has set his seal." So now let me take a look at the relationships between these propositions. Right off the bat, we see this negative-positive relationship in 26ab. Not, but. When you see that construction, you have a pretty good idea that you have a negative positive and not just an alternative here. So I'm going to go ahead and label this as a negative positive. Draw my arc over the top of that. And then I'm going to come down here to the second sentence, which is 27abc. Again, I see this not but construction. "Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life." However, before I arc that, I want to arc this explanatory note right here, because I think that's going to be included in the positive reinforcement over against the contrast of the negative. "But for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you." So the Son of Man is going to give this food. So I see an idea-explanation relationship right here that I'm going to note first. Idea-explanation relationship. And then I'll come back to this negative-positive relationship. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. Then I come to a challenge here in 27d, where I have this sentence, "for on him God the Father has set his seal." It seems to be a ground relationship, for or because on him, on the Son of Man, God the Father has set his seal. The question is, whether this relates as a ground only to verse 27 or to both verses 26 and 27. And I need to prioritize this relationship first before moving on to this one. However, I think I'm going to stick with prioritizing this relationship right here, because I think this ground statement focuses on the Son of Man. For on him the Father has set his seal. It seems to be the reason, not necessarily for the whole contrast, but for this specific element, the reason why we should work for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. Because the Son of Man has been set apart from all other food providers by this fact, that on him God the Father has set his seal. So the Son of Man in his personhood, that he's been set apart by God the Father because the Father has set his seal on the Son of Man. Therefore, we can know that his food is more desirable, that it leads to eternal life. So I think the ground relationship is particular to verse 27 here. So I'm going to draw this first. And then this leads me to consider the relationship right here between verse 26 and 27. And what I hear as I read over this a few times is the mirroring of Jesus' introductory formula is helpful for me to think about what is the relationship right here. Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Therefore, I say to you, do not work for the food that perishes. I think there's a therefore right here. I think there's an inference that Jesus is making based on this, call it a rebuke, call it an observation that Jesus is making about the reason the people traveled all the way around the lake to try to find him was because he had filled their stomachs. However, he said there's something more that I want to give you, food that endures to eternal life. So therefore, work for this food. I think that's what he's saying here. So I could even make a little note to myself that mirrors this introductory formula. Truly I say to you, do not, but, and then here in verse 27, therefore I say to you, do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life. So I see an inference here. I'm going to draw my arc over the top. And this is how I would arc John 6:26 through 27, with a focus on this negative-positive relationship. And you can consider that Jesus could have said this much more simply, right? He could have said it in a more straightforward manner. For instance, he could have said something like this. Truly I say to you, you are seeking me because you ate your fill of the loaves. Therefore, work for the food that endures to eternal life. It's the same bare content, right? It's the same basic content. And yet you can hear when we write it out in this simple, straightforward manner that it loses the strength that the contrast provides when Jesus sets it in terms of this negative and positive relationship, this negative and positive. You're not seeking me because you saw the signs, but because you have full stomachs. Therefore I say to you, do not work for the food that perishes, but work for the food that endures to eternal life, which I will give you, Jesus says. For on me, or on him, God the Father has set his seal. You can see that the negative-positive construction really drives home his point more forcefully, and so we want to take hold of that as we're looking for his flow of thought in this passage. And that's how I would arc John 6:26 to 27, with a focus on the negative-positive relationship.